The Blackwood University Library's restricted section isn't locked to protect the books. It's locked to protect the readers. The air inside is still, cold, and heavy with the scent of aged paper and something sharply metallic, like ozone. Dr. Alistair Finch, a tenured professor of esoteric history, knew exactly what he was looking for. A volume simply catalogued as The Blank Register, a book rumored to contain no text, only the names of those who dared to open it. He found the shelf easily, a stretch of raw, unvarnished wood that seemed to actively repel the light from his small penlight. The books here were bound in leather that looked suspiciously like cured human skin. But the blank register was different. It was bound in a soft, dry material that felt like fine, crushed bone dust, and it radiated an intense, localized cold. He pulled the volume free. It was surprisingly light, and as his fingers left the spine, the faint indentation where it had sat began to glow with a deep, sickly emerald light that slowly faded back into the dark wood. Alistair clutched the book to his chest, the bone dust binding creating a rough friction against his academic coat, and headed for the reading room. He was after knowledge, but the oppressive silence of the library felt less like respect for scholarship and more like a predator's patience. Alistair sat at the long mahogany reading table, the only sound the faint, dry crackle of the book's binding as he placed it on the polished wood. He ran a fingertip over the cover. No title, no author, just the stark, cold feel of crushed bone. He opened it. The pages were a brilliant, untarnished white, thick and fibrous, completely blank. He flipped through them slowly, methodically, blank, blank, blank. A profound disappointment settled over him, quickly followed by a sharp, paralyzing realization. The book wasn't empty. As he looked down, a single, perfectly rendered photograph of his own face, taken only seconds ago, began to bleed through the paper from the page beneath. The image was monochrome, stark, and utterly devoid of life, his expression frozen in that moment of anticipation. Beneath the photo, his full name, Alistair James Finch, began to slowly write itself in a thin, elegant script that was neither ink nor pencil, but a shimmering metallic substance that tasted faintly of copper and salt in the air. The book was a ledger, and his was the latest entry. A sudden cold breath touched the back of his neck, and the overhead fluorescent light began to flicker violently, the low buzz of the failing bulb sounding like a trapped insect's dying prayer. Panic seized Alistair. He slammed the book shut, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the vast room. The moment the cover closed, the lights went out completely, plunging the reading room into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The metallic writing smell intensified, and a thick, oppressive cold filled the space, making the very air painful to breathe. Alistair fumbled for his penlight, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. When the beam finally cut through the dark, it didn't illuminate the room. It illuminated a figure standing directly in front of him, at the end of the mahogany table. It was a man, impossibly tall and gaunt, dressed in the antiquated clothes of a 19th-century librarian, his skin the same color and texture as the book's crushed bone binding. The librarian was holding a small, leather-bound volume, the same volume of the blank register, and he wasn't looking at Alistair. He was looking at the book that Alistair had just closed, and a low, guttural, dry voice whispered from the librarian's frozen lips, "The ink is not dry yet. Finish the chapter." The librarian's eyes were not eyes at all, but two deep, swirling voids the color of the sickly emerald glow Alistair had seen on the shelf. Alistair knew he couldn't fight a specter woven from dust and dread. He had to sever the connection to the book, the ledger that now contained his identity. He shoved the table away, the heavy furniture scraping loudly across the stone floor, and made a desperate sprint for the restricted section's door. The librarian did not pursue him, but the crushing cold followed, and from the direction of the table The horrible scratch, scratch, scratch of metal on paper began the sound of the shimmering metallic substance continuing to write, filling the space beneath Alistair's name. As he reached the door, he heard the librarian's voice again, amplified and resonant, echoing through the vast, dark hall. "You are now a footnote, Professor. You are now a page." Alistair ripped the heavy door open and plunged back into the main library stacks, the relative warmth and silence of the ordinary space a momentary comfort. But as he looked down at his own hand, he saw a faint coppery stain on his skin, a small metallic sheen that seemed to glow in the ambient light. He scrambled for the nearest exit, the sound of the scratching growing faint but persistent, a steady background noise to his frantic escape. He burst out of the heavy bronze doors and onto the moonlit campus grounds, not stopping until the main spire of the library was a distant silhouette. Safe, he slumped onto a stone bench, catching his breath. He instinctively checked his coat pocket for the small, velvet-bound notebook he always carried. It was gone. Instead, his hand closed around a small, dry, brittle object. He pulled it out. The book. The blank register. It must have somehow been teleported back into his pocket. He stared at the bone-dust cover, his breath ragged. He opened the book one last time, needing to know what had been written. On the page that had held his name, a single, final line of the shimmering metallic script was completed beneath his signature. "And is hereby designated as permanent collection. Subject, esoteric history. Special status, bound." Alistair dropped the book, and as it hit the grass, his entire body seized, his skin blanching to the color of dry bone dust. His own shadow, cast by the moonlight, was now intensely dark and motionless, adhering fixedly to the ground, no longer following his body, waiting for the dawn. Subscribe to Whisper Dark for more.